Welcome back, Raw Thoughts listeners, to another episode with me, Mackenzie Tiggs. I'm super excited to have Ken Lewis on the podcast today. Super fun story. I actually met him while I was in Denver for 10X stages, and really just getting to learn and understand how to better my skills for the Great American Speak Off, getting onto stages and being able to speak what I know I love to speak about, and that is brain health, that is self development, and just improving our lives. So, Ken is a retired Air Force, or from the Air Force, and really has gone into that personal development, business coaching. And Ken, thank you so much for coming on today.
No, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to meet you again. And that we had one experience there live in Denver, and it really uh, hearing your story attracted me to you mostly for a lot of commonalities we had, both being in the emergency responder space initially, and then also with some of those black spots, those dark spots in our lives, and we just connected. And I was really looking forward to this conversation. So thank you
Yeah.
for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to get into a couple things that you have told me where, you've been in did bomb squad for the Air Force, you had all of these emergency services within, the Air Force, but then you also had these suicidal ideations. So I want you to kind of give us a roundabout of your life, what got you into the Air Force, and then where did you see that transition of like, whoa, this is making an impact in a negative way on my life and in my own mental health.
For sure. I well, I first joined in August of 2000, pretty much a few months right after high school, so 18 years old. And initially, when I joined, it was to get away from my environment. I was kind of not. My parents were both Army, and I was like, I want nothing to do with it. But then I was waking up drunk and high, like every morning by 10 a.m. I'd wake up, and that was the first thing I do: lean over, and grab whatever was in front of me and have at it. And I realized I couldn't sustain that. So I went and got on the first bus that I could out of there and joined the Air Force. And it kind of really made a huge impact in my life, especially after going to my last 10-year reunion and people showing me off their knife wounds and things. We were in a little small town in Arizona, about 45 minutes away from the Mexican border. And I was like, thank goodness I was able to escape that part of life. Who knows what would have happened? And in the Air Force, I first came in. I was a pharmacy technician for the first 7 years of my career and enjoyed that. But I was after 9/11 kicked off, I've always wanted to feel like I could contribute in a different way, and I wasn't getting that done or checking that box while still serving in a cozy hospital condition. Then I changed careers and went to explosive ordnance disposal, which was the military bomb squad. And in doing that, I found my people. I found my fit more than just like I found a purpose because like I knew I could help in this domain, but also the personalities that I was surrounded. I needed that. I thrived. Makes me think about how much trouble I got into when I was a pharmacy technician because it wasn't my right culture fit, and it wasn't something I would have called it back then. But obviously, I was paying for it based on the. I mean, I had two Article 15s within my first 4 years, which is a type of punishment in the military given. Not too many of us walking around with that. And then within EOD as emergency responder, I started to click and I really found a knack for it. And that community helped me grow bigger. But it wasn't until I started transitioning into this out of the military, making another pivot into the civilian sector where I was excited about it. And then it slowly started changing for me like, what the hell am I getting into? For so long, I've been this Air Force Master Sergeant EOD tech. That's who I was. That was my sole identity. And then now I'm trying to compare how am I ever going to do anything equally as important as what I once was doing? And that took me a while to get to this point of comfort, to the point where I was even considering, like, hey, like we talked about the suicide. I was worth more dead than I was alive. My insurance would pay the family 400K. And here I am, like twiddling my thumbs and trying to figure out what am I worth now. And that's kind of where the discovery and some help came into where I was trying to match my new purpose with an old purpose versus the stage of life that I'm in now. That was my purpose when I was in the military, was to help save lives, to help, mentor other technicians to do the same thing. Now my role and identity is I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm an entrepreneur. It took a while to understand that these are many hats that I wear, but it is me that wears those hats and not just I am the hat, right?
Right. Okay, I'm curious of what punishments you did get into in the military because there's many different aspects, right? Like people think like, "Oh, when you are in the military, like you're just a good person and you don't make mistakes." And it's like, "No, we're all still human, right? And we're getting into it young, you have to learn and you have to navigate these punishments. Like, what was it that you were getting in trouble for?
I think it was me, my first time being home, away from home, living in, the Air Force. We didn't call them barracks, there were dorms. And I mean, we had underage drinking was the first one I got. And it wasn't even underage drinking. It was I had a shrine in my room of empty Crown Royal bottles, right? Empty alcohol bottles. And in that, they did a no notice inspection. And they said I was in possession of alcohol because it combined all the little residue in these little cups and they got me for minor possession of alcohol. And, if I would have known differently, I would have fought it a little bit differently, but, I just took the punch and went on with it. The second one was kind of unique where I guess I would call it I was depressed. It was still within the same 4 years. I was stationed in South Dakota, and I got into this point of not really caring. I kind of like just fell in this slump where I wasn't happy with what was going on. Sick of my location, and I was just like not showing up to work on time, late, and I mean, getting warnings after warnings after warnings. So eventually, there was like, okay, here's an Article 15. So it's you have in the what is it called, progressive discipline. You get a LOA, which I forget, a letter of admonishment, letter of reprimand, and then you can keep going up to where finally you get Article 15, which is when it's severe, non-judicial punishments. So before you go to a judge or anything, it's handled internally, administratively. And it was, all right, we're done. You've been late way too many times and you got to wake up. And that was just another Article 15. I'm surprised that they didn't kick me out on that because people get kicked out for less, especially in today's military and the political construct that it's in. I remember one of the leaders sat me down like, Ken, you're part of the 30-30 club. It's like, what is that? Well, you got two Article 15s. There's not too many people. Like this is like the last chance. But one thing I realized is the mistakes that I did make, other than being repetitively late in November, they were always for something different. So I was definitely trial by fire. I was learning things and adjusting and never got really reprimanded for the same thing twice. But when I look back on that period of me not showing up and not caring, I think I was depressed. I never went diagnosed, but I was just in a state of not caring about anything. I wasn't happy. And what are they going to do? Kick me out? So what? So I go, and I'm glad they didn't, because then I probably would be matching stab wounds with my friends back in Arizona, right? But it was one of those places to where I just was disengaged. I was not happy. I wanted something different. And after that, what changed, I guess, in that why I was able to stay a little longer is shortly after that, my brother needed to get out of his location. So I allowed him to come stay with me. They allowed me to move off base, which was a huge turn of events for me. And then shortly I got orders to Japan. I was like, oh, heck yeah, I want to go live in Japan for 3 years. That'd be great. So change of environment, change of scenery, change of responsibilities kind of motivated me to take some different steps in my life. And before you know it, 20 years later, I was able to retire. Luckily, the first 4 years were my hardest, and after that, I made different choices that kind of, either I'm invested, or got to get off the pot type of thing.
Mindbase is the official sponsor of Raw Thoughts podcast. Mindbase is the only mental health and wellness technology platform that goes far beyond their traditional wellness app for first responders specifically. It uses data to optimize a proactive and people driven approach to first responders' wellness. Please reach out today to see about getting Mindbase into your agency to help our first responders. Yeah. Well, I mean, when we look at this, it's like it has, honestly, to me, it has nothing to do with being in the military. It has everything to do with us learning life, right? Like you could have been on a civilian job and been late for a whole month. And what are they going to do, right? Like they're probably going to fire you. And so to me, like the way of life, like, okay, yes, you're in the military and doing these and you get reprimanded for that. But when we look at the age that you are in, the developmental stage of your brain in that, it's like, well, no shit. Like most of the time, right? And so
Yeah.
and there's a lot of times that, we can get in these depressive states and we don't have to be diagnosed with depression. Like depressional states are right. You didn't feel like you were actually living for a purpose. You didn't actually feel like things were going right for you. You didn't have, this motivation. You didn't have something to kind of live for. And so when you don't like your environment, you probably didn't like your people, you didn't like what you were doing. And yeah, it's like, well, then what the hell am I doing?
And here's what's interesting too is, well, and I was trying to change jobs at that point, right after 9/11. I was at the Army recruiters trying to go. I was like, I just want to get infantry. Like, are you serious? You want? I was like, yes. Because I felt a certain type of way, and with that anger and hatred I had in me. And thank goodness I wasn't released to the army. I was only in the Air Force for a year. So he's like, you don't have enough time in service. We can't release you early. But what is interesting with how the military does handle, like this is one of those professions or job industries, I should say, that you can garnish your wages. I had extra duty was one of my punishments. So I would work my 8 hour shift and then I would have to go spend time. This was in South Dakota in the winter. So I'm shoveling snow 9, 10 o'clock at night in front of the gym or in front of different places. And that was my punishment. And I wasn't getting paid any more or less, but you are held accountable to your behavior, to things that, hey, here's the standards. And if you don't, here's a level of punishment. And in the most civilian work centers, they're not going to make you work extra duties. There's so many laws that protect that, but I'm on salary. I'm in the military. It's like, no, here's your punishment. This is a form of it. They could have docked my pay. As long as, because I was living in the dorms at the time, as long as I have food and shelter, I what it mean, that's the basic amenities that I need. So there's a lot more that can be done to help to hold people to that standard of what the military expects out of their personnel on a day to day that we kind of take for granted elsewhere. And I think after a while, there is a fear of the discipline, right? The bad side of discipline, like I don't want everyone to experience that again. But also that I'm glad that I did because I needed those jolts to wake up and be like, okay, what path do I really want to go back to where I was trying to run away from? Because that's what I'm looking at here. It's
Hmm.
like, no, I don't. So
Yeah.
um different, very different.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about your guys' training within the military and you being, on bomb squad. And there's a lot of people that come onto the podcast that are first responders. And I have this notion that it's, and I've been around people in the military, and this is why I have this point of view, I'm going to say, is that I understand, obviously why we have the military and what they do, and I appreciate it very much. My struggle is, though, is that there's a lot of training and there's not a lot of actual doing. Where, like, what did you see within the military in your own experience of like what you were training for and when you actually ever had to use those skills?
I think my time is a little bit more unique than maybe what some of the bomb technicians are facing today because when I went into the bomb squad, not we were still actively in Iraq and Afghanistan, these different locations. So it was a high demand for, I mean, it was a roadside bomb type of war, right? So they needed technicians that specialized in those. So it was a lot of training, but then get out there and do your job very quickly. Once we started pulling out of those different areas, those zones, right, it became more training. And that was one of the things I talk about when I got out of the military. I felt like I was the old vet sitting at a VFW bar sharing war stories with a bunch of young kids that didn't get to experience that yet. It was, you could see the culture shift within a culture because there was guys that had boots on ground experience and those that did not. And if for them, it is constant training and training and training. So we try to share those stories. We try to look at lessons learned. Like this is why we do what we do, because you want to make it feel natural. The training does help because the first time that I'm in country and I experience a situation, I've had so many realistic scenarios that have felt like a realistic scenario. So I much rather die in a simulation type event versus when it mattered. So the training is important. And one of the things that I realized too, there's the demand, especially, speaking of the Air Force, the demands that we placed on ourselves in my career field was much more than what I had in pharmacy. We needed to stay up on the medication. We didn't want people to overdose, especially children. So you had to be knowledgeable, which I think was a different type of training, just making sure that we were dispensing correctly. And that was practice all the time. But the stateside mission and the wartime mission, pretty much the same thing. Here you go. Versus when I was in explosive ordnance disposal, we take care of so many different threats, whether it's a homemade explosive, a grenade, a rocket launcher, so many different themes out there. You have to constantly train and you have to stay current because things are changing. The enemy is always updating their tactics. We have to match and exceed those tactics as best as we can. So we train, and do it over and over again. So that way, when we get in there, it's not our first time per se on handling that scenario. So I think it really depends. The training does help that reactionary force. You don't want to uh, blindly react. I think they say, I'm going to mess this quote up, that uh, when you're in the fight and flight response, right, kind of a lot of things shut down and you kind of revert to this baby brain type of mentality. And in doing so, if you train in a certain area, that's the stuff that's going to come fluidly because now it's kind of your subconscious is kicking in and acting that way versus that flight or fright where like, what do I do now? those situations still can occur. We can't plan for everything, but we try to make it easier. So
Yeah.
there's, but today a lot more training, and I kind of felt a little bit bad for the guys that came in uh, into this career field hoping to get some deployment experience, and then we started slowing down. So we try to make the training scenarios more evolved, more elaborate, so that way they can still get that because when it matters, they need to have it. We don't need to lose these skill sets because we had some really rough lessons when it first kicked off. A lot of loss of life that we could probably mitigate as long as we update our training and stay current with it.
Yeah. And I think there's such an importance for training. Absolutely. Being a paramedic, like you had to train day in and day out. But I will say, and I think this is from my own experience, that you can train all you want, but until you actually live that experience, you have no idea how you're going to react.
Absolutely.
And I say that too because actually in August I was working as a paramedic. I got deployed to a military base to actually be the civilian paramedic for it. And we had so many medicals. It was like medical after medical after medical, and it was coming down to a equipment malfunction. And me, right, I'm not in the military. They do have to listen to me. I am above them. And I'm like, we need a tactical pause. Like, we need to fix this equipment malfunction, and commanders and the upper staff were like, no, 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 like we have to run it like it's real life. And I'm like, yeah, and if it was real life, like you would want to tactically pause and fix what is taking your own people out.
Yeah.
And there was a really big, I'm going to say kind of a butting of heads at the beginning. And by the end of the 4 days, they were like, oh my gosh, when our people speak up, like they work harder, they have better, interactions with each other. We get the job done. We get the job done quicker, more efficiently. I'm like, yeah, because you were allowing these people to say, like, hey, I need some extra time. And the caveat that I got was there was one incident where this guy is about to go into heat stroke. Like he's in heat exhaustion and he is not going to, like, these were not just like minor, like tiny little, things.
That
Like
impacts
these
you for life, right? Once you get a hit, that's like a checkbox you have to report. I'm a heat victim, heat
would
casualty. Okay.
I cannot stand that they do. Okay. That is
Okay.
one little thing that I cannot stand that they do. So this guy is there, and the thing about this is coming back to the training and in the experience. Okay, so we have all of these people, they're in the training, they now have one of their own men go down, he's on the stretcher, and they're like, we don't know what to do, we don't know what to do. And for me, I'm like, the situation is fine, like the guy is good, like we've got treatment going, and he's in a good place. And I look around, I'm like, hey, motherfuckers, what are you guys training on? And they're like, well, we're training on these stretchers and these wheels. I'm like, then get the fucking stretcher and wheel and let's go. And like, I know I can be very vulgar. I know I can be very front forward, but one of the commanders like comes over and gives me knuckles and he's like, I'm so glad you said that. And I said, this is my struggle with so much training versus not having actual lived experience. It is not the same. And I bring this back to because I don't know how it is that we can help, like how our military can help our civilian first responders because they are the ones having this lived experience and the training and doing this. And let's help our military get the experience so that when they are out in the fight and fighting for us, they have knowledge to actually come back onto because it doesn't matter. It is not the same. And I will fight for the end of life that lived experience and training are not the same.
I can, just thinking about the first device I ever seen blew up in real world, and there was an injury involved. That I remember my heart racing, and I felt a little bit like, oh my god, what is happening here? And because in our training scenarios, nobody really dies. There's really no maim happening. So yes, the experiences. I would agree with that. Once you're in it, those things are learned, and those lessons, I would say, are embedded much harder into me when something bad happens. One of the weaknesses that I've always felt during our training was the simulations. The more like I want to be able to, for example, an explosive op is very time consuming, but time for a training exercise, we like always trying to find out how do we reduce time, how do we make this faster. Like, but then we're training, we're reinforcing bad habits because this is not a fat. We're not here to to not everything is on a timer, right? So
Hmm.
um, the more simulations we can reduce or remove from an environment and the more realism we can bring in there, I think more mayors, I think, those live action trainings between city and state and government official or organizations with more realistic type injuries and screaming pay. There was one training scenario where somebody set up and was magnificent, where we were in this modeled house. They had a hostage situation in there with a bomb strapped to their chest, and the exercise was to go in there and do a rescue op. Again, all training scenario, but the level of that, how involved that actor, right, the victim was, holy hell, made that so real for me. The screaming, the everything she was doing, the pressure, the simulation fire we were receiving, and everything. Holy hell, it felt so real. That was the most realistic training that I think I've experienced, and it was great. It was great training because you realize how your blinders come on and how you're like strumbling and how things just start turning off, words aren't coming out right, and why a team is helpful because hey, stupid, come back to the table. Like we're doing this. That was so the more realistic, the better. And I think when we start throwing in a bunch of like cards, you see this. Come on, man. No, I don't. So yeah, there is definitely a place for the realistic, more environments, maybe more humanitarian missions or something like that, right? Where we can get
Yeah.
out there um, and play more.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so needed, right? And I think that's where that's where my struggle is like our own frontline workers need help. Like how can we gain our military to be protecting our own land here? Like we're in our own warfare on our own land with our own people. Like how can we get the military to help us? Like aren't they here to protect the United States? Like we have our own warfare going on and it just seems, like they're just in training. I mean, and like I said, yeah, it's your own community. Like these people, are living in our areas, right? Like when you're on base, you're still in the communities. You go to our community grocery store and our community bank. And it's like also, even if you are, somebody in the military, say you're driving and you're going to work and you get in a car accident, like you're having the civilian paramedics come and treat you in the civilian, law enforcement. Like you're not having the military law enforcement or paramedics come and get you. And this is something that not many people know is that the military bases, they call the county and the areas for their medical assistance and for their own policing. And so people are like, "Oh, the military doctors take care of everything and the military paramedics and the military all, officers." I'm like, "No, they don't. They still call us. They still call 911 and we get there and I'm like, you're a doctor?"
Yeah.
Like,
I
and
have a fire department do a quick triage, but we're still calling AMR, right? So
yeah, and like, there's been multiple times, like, there was one patient, and I was like, "You're a doctor? Like, why were these things not done?" Right?
incorrect assumptions, right? Like,
Incorrect assumptions, but it also comes back to not having this lived experience because they've never done it on a real patient, and so they get very timid, and so then they're afraid, and then they, don't treat the things that they need to be treating. And like I said, I see these things out of my own personal experiences. Like these are my own opinions and I love when people can bring other opinions to me because it's like let's have this discussion. So I don't want people listening to this be like, gosh, she's always like bashing them. It's like no, like I'm bringing these topics up because they need help. Like they need other minds to come up with solutions.
well, here's something that might be of interest is there with Bomb Squad is kind of a unit. There's a lot of pride, and you see other EUD things. So we would reach out to Fort Carson because there's a EUD unit. Army EUD is not everywhere, which is again the explosive ordnance disposal Bomb Squad. They're not everywhere, but we happen to have a pretty large one here in Colorado Springs. So we'll reach out and do training with them. But we also had a pretty good relationship with the city of Pueblo and their bomb squad and the El Paso regional. So we had membership part of the there is a regional bomb squad association. We would go to that and we would offer because there was a lot of times where we had funding that the cities would not. Like, hey, we got this training coming in for bomb robots. I can bring 7 people on. Anybody interested that has the same type of robot and bring them in, right? And we can do some maintenance and stuff. So we always try to find ways. And when people will call, like, hey, the TSA bomb guys, if they wanted to do something, we would call and try to. So I think it's a matter of building that network, figuring out who are the leads, and going direct. If they were to call the base training manager or something like that, they might not have got the same answer versus calling the person in charge of that local bomb military unit. I'm all for it. We're all about training, and if we can expand and increase that, let's do it. So I think get in that relationship, find the network of other, whatever that community is between. If you have a military unit there, call up that hospital specifically, the readiness department, be like, hey, we're interested in doing this together. Do you have what kind of things? And people are going to be excited. And if you get a no the first time, then call somebody else because there's somebody excited about doing some more increased training
Yeah.
versus the same old book stuff we get over and over again. Let's change it up. So I just build a network and make some phone calls.
Yeah. I love that you said like if you get no on the first time, keep going. Because that's life, right? Like that's so many different situations and that kind of is going to bring us to this kind of switch in the conversation is you getting out of the military and having to figure life out. Like how many no's have you been getting on, expanding your coaching and your brand and what you're wanting to do? Like what do you do when you get those no's in your life?
Recommitment. I think this will go back to my issue of transitioning was trying to redefine my purpose. And once I realized like now my purpose is all about providing opportunities and resources for I have two girls that are 5 and 7 right now. And one wants to be a space scientist, at least today she does. Another one wants to be an animal doctor. And we'll see what that changes. But I realized that with that being kind of my focus, that's driving me to want to do more and create these opportunities and show, hopefully, display work ethic. So if somebody says no, I'm not letting that person down. I'm letting me and myself down and the family because this is what's being displayed. So it's really committing like this is my commitment. This is why I'm doing this is what I'm in it for. So it's I think attaching to your values and to maybe what your personal statement is or whatever that why is. And I know it sounds cliche at times, even when I say it's like, oh, everybody's saying that. But for me, it made a huge difference. It made enough difference to where I didn't, blow my brains out. It was that so it mattered enough for me to want to share that message because maybe somebody else needs to hear it. That when you are faced with these challenges, to not throw in the towel, that there is a way out if you allow there to be, if you go out and seek it. Not easily, right? Not everything was easy. I went and sought help and got had a whole lot of conversations, but I eventually climbed out. And am I still struggling? Absolutely. But now, because I want to be a coach, want to be a speaker, all that does is help me when somebody else faces it. Now how did I do it? What worked for me or what worked for my colleagues or peers or whoever else? It just adds to this storybook I have of my experiences and what people could do because it worked for me. And obviously, to each their own, it's not going to be guaranteed, but at least I can say, hey, there is hope. There is a chance that this can change differently if you can just try these steps one piece at a time and commit to whatever that purpose is. And if you don't have that purpose, take some time and writing that values down and figure out what is important to you now, what guides your values, or what did. This was my thing. I used to kick ass in the military. I had a lot of accolades and achievements. And then during this transition phase, I was like, why am I so worthless now? Like, what the hell am I doing? Because I am not living up to the same type of person. And it was the accountability piece because now I'm working on my own. I'm not accountable to that military justice system that was giving me those Article 15s. That went away. So now I'm not going to get myself in trouble. Are you serious? But I think now recommitting is like, okay, it's not just about am I going to get in trouble or arrested or something like that. But what am I not going to be able to do? My kid will never be a scientist if I can't do these things now because I'm letting her down. Now, that's not to say that absolves her responsibility, but as far as internally, my responsibility requires me to do some more things differently, so that way I can, hopefully pass those ethics on, those habits potentially.
Yeah, and you're passing on those values, you're passing on the values, the standards, reasons why you're doing this. I want to deep dive a little bit more into, your own lived experience of having those suicidal, thoughts and ideations and walk us through like what a day was like in your life and where you found that pivotal moment. Like, where was it that you were just seeing these negative thoughts, these negative patterns, these negative habits to, suicide and then getting that help? Like, what was that transition?
It started shortly after the military. I was very excited leaving the military. Uh, I was doing a lot of prep work. I was networking. I was getting engaging. I was learning a lot. And I was excited about the possibilities that were out there that I wasn't exposed to while I was still in uniform. My goal at the job is I had a certain values. Like I want to get a job that at least pays me this a year. I was trying to do the math of what I was, and I didn't quite make it, but I was close enough to it to where I did it. But I think was part of my problem is my goal was to get a job that paid a certain salary where that should have been a stepping stone to a much higher, bigger goal. And that was my goal. So when I got that job, I was right back in the hamster wheel, so to speak, right? I was just right back in the grind, and I was just going back to the task. Now, one of the things that was about me was I was very loyal to my job, my profession, to the betterment, I guess, of my situation and my environment. And there were some things in my first job that I had where I realized I was trying to help people. I wanted to do like these leadership book clubs because it wasn't happening. I was used to mentoring, but then I felt like I was begging to help people. And then I was experiencing things that I didn't quite necessarily agree with at work. It kind of go when once I didn't know at the time my values and my ethics and how I operated. I didn't like them. It kept, but I was so used to just being loyal. Like I'll embrace the suck, so they say, right? I'm just going to embrace the suck and go with it. But then when I would come home, even though I had a job to keep me busy, that's all it was keeping me busy. I still didn't feel like I was worth a damn because now I'm coming home. Yeah, I had a good paycheck, but what the hell was I doing? I wasn't proud of what I was doing. Maybe it reminds me a little bit about pharmacy days, right? I wasn't happy about that job, and now I'm just doing it because it was bringing home a paycheck, which was
What was your job?
so I worked as a it was called a strategic sourcing manager. I was didn't even know it was existed. It was a thing at the time, but it was because of my different roles. It was about contract making contracts or finding contracts for logistics and transportation for this global company. So it was a lot about networking, making sure I understood. And I understood a lot of the vernacular or the language used within the contracting, but how do we establish routes, makes things happen at the headquarters level for these different things that will and it was a government job or not a government job. It was a government contractor. So I was a civilian working for a company that was employed by the government. So I felt I was still helping the troops without being a troop still myself.
Hmm.
And that was what motivated me. So when the company keeps reminding me of their position at the time was, we're going to raise our EBITDA, right? Earnings before income tax and just whatever. It's an acronym used in business. They wanted, we're going to raise it by 7%, 7%. So I was like, whoa, tell me like you'll get that, but remind me I came here to help the troops. Remind me about my why. Like I'm in here for a whole different reason. And if I can fill that bullet or that checkbox, you're going to get your 7% because that's why people aren't here strictly. You're saying that that's a shareholder's concern. That's not my concern, but I will help you get that if you remind me why I'm here. But that message was always like we're all about the money, and I didn't really care for that because it's like I'm here to help the troops still in this bipartisan way. Um, so as I transitioned this from the military where I had a purpose to this other one, like I'm a hamster in a wheel type of thing. I wasn't really happy anymore. I was coming home kind of like, what am I doing? There was no joy in what I was doing. I was just kind of checking boxes. And again, it goes back to my purpose. I didn't really have a purpose identified at that time. So I was trying to match what I was doing, how I was ever equally as important to what I once was doing. And I remember one night just sitting in my chair and it just kind of, I had a beer in hand and a gun in hand. And I'm just making a checklist like, okay, this is the night, right? And this is what's going to happen and I started going down of reasons to stay. Nope, that's not. Nope, nope, nope. And finally, like the last list was my two girls. That was the reason. And I was like, okay, yeah, I can't leave them. And that was my turning point of, okay, there's my new purpose. That was the reason why I'm not going to blow my brains out. 400K is not going to give them a father, right? So with that kind of motivated me to do different. I quit my job. I wanted to become a coach because I still felt a passion to help people. So I figured, okay, can I do that doing something else? My new goal, instead of hitting a certain, I want to have a net worth of $20 million, right? And I look at it, it's because I want to be able to pass on a legacy to my kids. I want to be able to help I want to help law enforcement and veterans and other emergency responders with, I have three different nonprofit ideas. It all takes money to do this. So people, when I share that $20 million, people think, "Oh, what about the money?" But it's fuel, it's resource, right? I need that to do these other things with. So a lot changed in that experience because now I ask the girls, what do they want? What's important to them? And that's how I found out what their goals are. And I kind of adopt that into mine. And I just wish, I guess this is kind of the message I share with other veterans. I would have had that conversation when it didn't matter. That I would have went through this whole self-identity, self-awareness phase of what was important to me a long time because I was so comfortable and I loved what I was doing. And now when I hung up my uniform, I kind of lost in the woods. Who am I now? And I think I would have handled the transition better if I would have asked those type of questions first, versus how do my skills transfer to another? Like how does a bomb squad transfer into supply chain management? Right? Like, I didn't make those connections. I was so surprised that I even got it, but I realize now there's a lot of soft and hard skills that I have, but I didn't stay there because of my values didn't align, my ethics didn't align, my purpose no longer aligned, and I think that's what motivated me to not be somewhere else today, and yeah, and I'm happy to see these girls. Even though some days I wish, these kids like, oh my God, I just need a break. Right? Especially after 2 weeks of being home for winter. I'm like, "Are you sure that's your purpose statement still?" But it is. I mean, it right now is my guiding light. So,
Yeah.
um, whatever that is, latch onto it.
So I want you to explain a little bit, more on you sitting there, you have a gun in one hand, you have a beer in one hand, you have these thoughts in your heads, right? Where you're able to, make this list of every reason why you don't want to be here on earth. But then something switches and says, "Hey, you know what? You have your girls, you want to be here." What was it like if you were to kind of make this into a movie, like what happens next? Like you set the gun down, you set the drink down, and you start crying and asking for help. Like what was that?
Yep. I mean, I don't know if you know, I was trying to fight back the tears just thinking about that story just a minute.
I know, and I'm deep in. I told you, if you were gonna go around the bush, I was gonna tell you right now. Like this is this is the point where I'm like, no, let's get there because this is what truly, truly happens with people that open up like you do, right? And I saw your tears. I saw you trying to hold back, but I can promise you that you being able to share these experiences is what is going to connect more to people than being able to say, hey, you need a purpose. Hey, you need, something to live for. It's like we understand that and we do, and what you said really hit home of like, I wish I knew this self-awareness and these values before it got to that point. And that's where I come in, right? Like that's where my coaching and my getting into departments is. I mean, that's what my workbook is like, let's deep dive because I didn't grow up like we didn't grow up as a family being like, hey, these are our standards, these are our values, this is what we live for. It's just I innately have gained these skills in doing it. And so it is those moments, right, where like it matters to you. It hits home to you when you are starting to get emotional about it.
Mhm.
And that's also what really, really, really connects with other people
Yeah.
is that vulnerability piece right there. And so I'm going to have you deep dive a little bit more into that day, into that situation, because I know people listening have been in that spot, and if they haven't been in that spot, there could be a time that they are in that spot and need help understanding. Like, I haven't ever been in that spot. I've responded to people that are, but you have that, right? It comes back to that lived experience. Like, what was it that you did next?
Yeah, and just real fast, I'm not scroll around, but it's funny because I know how much suicide awareness and suicide prevention training and all these things. We had the ACE method, right? Ask, care, escort. I've been on the other side of trying to help others that have just experienced a suicide death in their life. There's two that I remember specifically in the military, and I saw the hurt. So I mean, I know the pain that it caused. I'm well aware of the attributes of what not to do, all the known signs. I'm not going to start handing out letters and giving away things and all that. Right? Of course, those are all indicators. I'm not going to do those things. But I was not opening up. I was not sharing my feelings. I was just kind of holding a lot of it in. And I think, well, specifically that night, after I kind of the tears that come to my eyes, thinking about the kids and kind of what would life be. I think that's kind of where it triggered. Uh, would there be another person raising my kids? What's going to happen? What's that going to like? Who are they going to be without a father? There's not a lot of like you say, dual family or two dual parent families that grow up these days. So, where we're going to be in the statistic. And it was the gun just kind of stayed. I just put the gun down and just was thinking about these things like, okay, you know better. Like, why? I think it was a lot of soft blame. Like, why were you even thinking this shit? Like, how do we even get here in the first place? And I don't know. Like, how did you know you are such a motivator during, especially in the military? I was always the one that was trying to help others, but then never really looked at helping myself. So a lot of it was self blame and critiquing my thought process up to that point. Like, what are you doing? How are you doing this? How did you get here? And like, how was this even an option? It was just this point of, yeah, you know better. You knew better. And the fact that you were thinking about it, uh, I used to joke about it. We had a morbid sense of humor in the bomb squad because, you kind of
Mhm.
always prepared for
Yep.
death. Like, oh man, I just rather step on a landmine or something like that. If my leg hurts, I just rather go get my foot blown off and so on. So I don't know if it just became normal talk or normal speak or normal thought, but like the morbid thought process, the black humor, dark humor, or whatever, kind of was part of my norm. But specifically that night, sitting up in there, it was crying. Like, how could I even think that I was going to do this to them? Right. So that right there was enough for me to motivate. I cannot do this to them. And that's what I love about it now. It's because that's why it's my purpose. Because man, it was selfish, right? This is good. But yeah, it was the selfish thoughts about it. And then I did go get help. Come to find out that there was more in me than that. There was a couple deaths that I saw overseas that I still blame. That's why I fell out of religion. I started blaming God for a lot of the deaths of young men that I saw. Come to find out, I was still blaming myself for a lot of deaths that I experienced. That again wasn't my fault, but I felt like sometimes they were because that was my job to not let that bomb go off. So the kind of layers, it stacks, and I got to a point where the foundation just wasn't strong enough anymore. And that's what I think that sucks. I could have went and talked. That event, the first event that happened in my military career was 2009. I followed that shit up for 10 years. And then more and more and more and more, where eventually now it's talking about it, getting it out there. And I thought it was better. I talk about it, but more so I don't cry nearly as much, but I guess I don't go that deep into the story. But it took me a while even to share my, some of the combat stories, even to my, counselors and stuff. Um, and I knew that I wasn't ready to share it out in public because if I get like this, right, if I can't control my emotions, then maybe I'm not ready to talk about it. But I needed to, and to do that in a closed setting to get that help and to share, I guess, motivating me to continue and get those next steps that were required under my belt. And I guess there's just little steps from there. Um, I tried a gratitude journal. I really suck at journaling, but there was a period where a few weeks I was trying to figure out what I'd be happy for, and I still struggle with what am I happy for. But we played this little game at the table. We had these little uh, table topic cards that the kids we all take turns, and some of the questions are you're grateful, and the kids come out so easily with something and say, "Oh yeah, it's a good idea," or "What are you happy for? What are you like?" And that helps too, because then it brings back some of that humanity that maybe I've lost. Right, I've already lost the spirituality, but it brings back some of those little things that I tend to overlook because I'm so task based. I'm so like results oriented that sometimes I need to think differently, and those little exercises over time help. But it's really again I guess the answer to the question was a lot of self blame. Like, you were so stupid. How did you even get here? You know better.
So one of the things that I really want to touch on is that you're talking about, if you're on stage and these tears and you want to get to a point of not crying. I'm going to push you to never ever ever go away from showing those emotions because that is the exact point that people are going to say, "Wow, that really hit home to him.
Mm,
Holy cow, I resonate with that." And this must really matter to him. You're also being an example for people where they say, "Oh, we don't show emotions, we're strong," right?
mm,
And you're saying, "No, I am going to show my emotions. I am okay with me crying in front of 500 people." It's not like I want to just get up there and cry for no reason. It's like, "Hey, I have a message that is so impactful that I want you to feel my fierceness and my emotion and why I'm so freaking tied to this." And so,
I think there's a balance though. I think there's I
for
want
sure,
people to connect to the emotion, but not feel sad for me. Right. Like I'll just critique this. I think the level of emotion I had, the tears, I think was good because I was still able to continue the message, still able to chat, and I was able to show it. But if I start sobbing so much where I can't even complete a sentence, like I don't need like that. I think there needs to be a balance. Like there's no way I could have shared the message and that state of mind to where I just like right? Can't breathe.
correct.
Um, so for others too, think about that. Like if you are, that was my kind of rule of thumb. If I could not get to that conversation, I wasn't ready to share it yet. I need to still go help. So that way I wasn't just, I don't want people to feel sorry for me, but at least have, I guess, a difference between, empathy and sympathy type of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Would just be my caveat.
For sure. And I say that because I think there's so many people that, just steer away from like, don't show any emotion. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, we need that, right? Do we and like you mentioned too, okay, well, if I'm up on stage or talking to somebody and I can't even get through what I'm trying to talk about, you're not really helping them at that point. They're now
Mm,
needing to help you. And
yeah.
there's that kind of transition, right? And that also brings back to like if you're at that point where you can't talk to somebody about the situation or the experience that you've been through, you're completely right. It may not be the right time. It may not be the right place. And going back to being raw, being real, authentic, and willing to share, that willing to share part doesn't always have to be with another person. That can be with your gratitude journal, that can be with your own journal, that can be with your counselor or your therapist, or, even with your own self. Like being able to share, like, oh, like, why am I getting so emotional about this? Like,
Yeah.
where is this coming from? Now you're bringing in the questions for yourself to really look into and investigate of like, why is this happening? But many people don't even allow that to occur. And so it's just like, oh, I'm just not going to bring it up at all because I know I'll cry and I don't want to, come across as I'm weak. And so I just won't say anything about that.
You know, maybe it's part of the culture I had in the military as well, where we never wanted, there was a lot of, I don't know if I should say stigma or false beliefs that if I start going and getting this help, that I won't be deployable. I want to be able to always deploy. I want to do my job overseas. And if I start opening up, start doing these things. So we would, have our little sessions around the bar or, the break room, and guys that had kind of similar experiences, we would share. And I had one colleague that mentioned, he's like, what our job is like to do these sterios or to do these discussions, right? These type of talks. But ultimately what we end up happening is we take all those emotions, all the bad, all the hurt, everything we've seen, you ball it up into a tight little ball, you swallow it, and then you drown it in alcohol. And whenever it starts coming up again, you drown it again with more alcohol. I think that was something that we truly believed, that we internally just felt this way without it needing to be said, is that I'm going to drown these thoughts, use everything else with alcohol and not let it come up.
Hmm.
And it does damage over time, right? Because then when you finally do open up and let that ball come back out, it's just so hard to control because it's on a whole nother level now. It's just been building up and caking over with everything else you've experienced. Um, it took a long time to just even start talking about that, but we always wanted to get out there and do a job. We felt better
Hmm.
doing our job. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's something I wish I would have tackled differently, or maybe not had that same fear that I couldn't do my job if I started opening up or tried to fix this, which didn't seem as a problem because I was functioning. I was doing great. Or at least I felt I was doing great. But it does, it's a scab you keep on picking that doesn't get time to heal.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you talked about earlier too is like it's not just one thing, it's the stacking. It's the continuous layer after layer after layer after layer. And that's what's happening, when you are shoving these things down, which so many people do, right? Like let's not talk about them, let's not bring them up, let's not discuss these things. Then what ends up happening is that you push them down for so long, and that is where we're seeing cancers. That's where we're seeing these health issues. That's where we're seeing these behavioral, aspects come out in people that are not good, is because they are literally letting that thing that they're pushing down and balling up and continuing to not let out, that's showing up in other areas in our body. Our mind and our body are connected. And so it is, I mean, it's very, very, very much the culture of military and first responders. And I'm going to say, literally, our world right now is like, we don't actually deal with our problems. We find a way to distract ourselves. Alcohol is the number one acceptable drug, basically, right? Like it is completely acceptable to go out after hard days of work and go have a beer with your buddy and say, "Oh, well, I'm processing this." But when we actually look at alcohol on a chemical level, it is a depressant. So here we have somebody already, struggling with their day at work or what their thoughts are or what's happening and in a depressive state. Now you add alcohol onto it. Now we're just going into a negative spiral of our brain health. And this is where it comes back to, like, it's not just mental. Like, our mental is our mind, but our organ of the brain, these are how these substances are impacting it and changing it, on top of having this stigma of like, oh, you don't talk about your feelings. And it's like, but you are allowing me to go drink my feelings away. You are allowing
You
me
just
to
keep
go.
reinforcing that same thought process over every time. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And so this is just a bigger aspect of I'm going to say a bigger challenge, and more of what my purpose is like, we're accepting. If we don't say, hey, this is not good or this is, not acceptable, that means that we're accepting how it is. So if people do not speak up and say, hey, you know what, I'm not drinking because it doesn't make me feel good, it doesn't make me have a good mindset for life, it makes my body feel like shit. Like, and also to our friends and our family and to these people, like we need to be bringing these topics up because if we don't, we're saying, you know what, your behavior, your decisions are okay with me even when they're not. And you let them spiral, and it's like we all have our blinders on. We all have ways that we're like, oh, they'll never know that I'm having a hard time because I'll just go drink and then it will be,
Yeah.
I'm intoxicated and then everything will be fine. No, everything is not fine.
I think that there leads like maybe some two different type of responsibilities out there. One is to yourself, knowing that you to have a community, a support network, or somebody that you can talk to, or knowing that you can go get help and it will stay private and do forth and so forth. That you owe it to yourself to at least try to find the strength or the courage to take that first step to sit on a couch if necessary or sit with a friend. There was a Green Beret I was speaking with, and we were chatting, and his stories were, if I was to say my stories versus his stories, he has some pretty outrageous stories that I've never experienced. But he was in a very similar place than I.
Hmm.
And I thought he was getting all this help. So, like, if I have somebody that I would look up to the type of environments he's been into, who does he look up to when he's in the same boat? So, but what we had in common is that we were both facing a struggle, and we were able to talk about it over at a coffee joint, just having a coffee. And it's like, cool, I'm not alone, right? Like, I'm not the only part that's doing this. So, there's the responsibility to yourself. The second part would be the importance of getting to know your team or who's on your team, especially if you're sharing a car, whomever you're with, right? If you have a partner that you see every day, that know them better, know when something's not jiving right or not something. If they need some time off, ask them those questions. I think we owe it to those people. Like, hey, the military, for me, the military is going to get, we're going to get ours. I'm going to get my time out of you. You signed a contract, 4 or 6, whatever years it was. But I need to realize that somebody might not be 100%, whether it's something financially, relationship, something going on in their life that they're not performing at 100%, to be able to ask those questions. Bro, what's happening? What's going on? I'm not your therapist here, but something's different. What is going on? All right, what do you need? I can point you to the resources to at least take those first steps. Divorce is pretty high with our career field, and that impacts people, especially if they get married. All right, what do we do next? I need you to take care of this, because when we deploy, I need your mind to be as right as possible. So the same thing stateside. Like, if you start noticing whoever you're sharing a car with, if things are quieter than normal, they're not as funny as normal. Like, what are they not doing that they normally do? Start asking those tough questions. Like, bro, you're right, and don't just accept it, because we're all gonna say, yeah, man, I'm fine, right? If you truly believe there's something, like, dig in deep and ask them, like, what is bothering you? What's going on? Because you're not the same self, and get them to spend some time and whatever that is. I don't drink nearly as much. I had champagne for New Year's, and every now and then I'll have maybe a glass of wine, but far decreased than what I once had. And I do feel better about it, and nowhere near as sad and stuff. So I think it does play a negative influence in a life. So I wouldn't say go out and get a beer, but maybe you might need to have a calm environment where a beer is okay, just to open it up. But look out for yourself and look out for your teammates.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Ken, it has been such a delight to be able to have a conversation with you today. And you have just really been able to express what my values are with this podcast of being vulnerable, showing these stories and lived experiences to bring connections. And so I just appreciate you, being able to be on here and be raw yourself. Is there any last parting words that you have to say?
Yeah, I just hope that somebody can resonate and know that, you aren't alone, that there are other people, different professions. I spoke heavily with the military bomb squad, but still a human experience nonetheless. So however we end up getting to those spots, to know that we can climb out. You have a choice to continue digging or to reach up. So I just encourage you, if you get there, to reach out to somebody close in your life that understands you. And hopefully you can find a path much sooner to that, shining spot in your life, much shorter than what I did. So that'd be the only thing. Thank you for doing this. Tell your friends about it. And the thing is a message that needs to be heard, or at least what you talk or speak about needs to be considered much earlier, even if they think everything was fine, because you'll never know when you might fall victim to that train of thought, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, listeners, I appreciate you coming on and hearing another person's story, being able to connect with them. And if this resonates not only with you, but maybe somebody that you know, I would absolutely love for you to be able to share this podcast with them, see some of these skills, see some of these, knowledgeable things that we are actually putting into action to be able to get help for people. All of the resources are below for the podcast. If you are in that state of feeling like you are going to commit suicide, please call 988. That is the suicide hotline, and be able to reach out to somebody, be able to reach out to somebody and ask for help. I appreciate you, Ken, and I will see you guys for another episode. See you later. Bye.